We're going to be looking at Ezra, Esther, Ezra. And for those of you who may not have been tuned in last week, what this is putting Esther chronologically in the book of Ezra. Nehemiah also goes in that book, but we're not, I didn't combine those two in that way. So for a while we're going to be studying the book of Ezra, and then we're going to look at the book of Esther, and then go back to the book of Ezra. Last week, when we started, we began in Ezra chapter 1, and we started looking at verse 1. And there's something I want to talk about there, but let's look at the verse. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, now we'll get to verse 2 later. But notice what's taking place here. The first year of Cyrus. When was that? Now, a lot of folks come up with the idea that it's the first year of Cyrus's reign as king of Persia, but I would dispute that. It's not talking about the first year of the reign of Cyrus, because we're going to notice something about the kingship or the rulership that took place after Babylon was destroyed, conquered by the Medo-Persian Empire. So first of all, notice what's said in Daniel 1 and verse 21. And we'll notice a couple of passages there that will help us. Note what's said there in Daniel 1 and verse 21. And Daniel continued even, watch him, unto the first year of King Cyrus. Now, when was that? Look at Daniel 6 and verse 28, and hopefully I'll be able to put all this together that'll make sense and not confuse you more. But look at Daniel 6, verse 28. So this Daniel prospered, watch him, in the reign of Darius. Darius wasn't a Babylonian king. And in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Darius was a Medo king. When Cyrus and the Persians built this coalition of Media and Persia, they shared joint rulership. And Darius was a king of the Medes. So when it says, so Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian, that starts to give us a little more information. He prospered in both of their reigns. Where? Where would you think? In Babylon. There's the key to all of this. When you look at the end or the beginning of the Medo-Persian Empire with Darius, you see that this is down the road a piece from the time when Daniel was first taken to Babylon, when the events of the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and all of these events, you remember in chapter 1, as we pointed out, it mentioned what's going to come way in the future. It jumped over all those years and said he reigned into the first year of King Cyrus. Now, after the Medo-Persian victory over Babylon, Darius the Median first reigned in Babylon, Daniel 5 and verse 31. And later, Cyrus the Persian made his capital there. Now you start to see the picture of how this time frame fits in here. And the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. What did Jeremiah say about this time in history? You know, the books of Daniel, the book of Jeremiah, a number of these books, but Daniel and Jeremiah and Isaiah in particular, the critics like to say, oh no, nobody could do that. Nobody could look way ahead of time and say this is what's going to happen. But the prophets of God did. Now, why do the critics take that position? That man cannot look ahead, these books, they attribute these books to being written much later. Why? So that they can claim, see, these events happened after the prophet, after they originally happened, and now the prophet has been alive and he's seen this stuff. He read the history, and so now he writes about it. No, that's not true. And the reason they do that is because they absolutely despise prophecy. They absolutely despise it. They hate it. Why? Because of all the miracles that are seen in God's Word, when you look at it carefully, the idea of prophecy is probably the greatest affirmation that there is a God who knows everything that's going to happen, who is all-powerful, and who can also direct history in such a way, whether miraculously or I've drawn a blank there in the word I wanted. Providentially, thank you, Jenny. Whether it's either one of those two, to them, that's just absolute false. So what did Jeremiah say? Before we do that, though, let's look at Isaiah 44 and verse 28. Isaiah 44 and verse 28. Isaiah said that saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd. God, remember, is speaking through Isaiah, looking down the road, and he tells Isaiah to let people know that Cyrus is his shepherd. Well, what does a shepherd do? He guides the flock to the food that it needs. He guides them to healthy food, etc. He protects them. God says Cyrus is my shepherd. That means God appointed him, doesn't it? And shall perform all my pleasure. He's going to do what I want him to do, God says. Even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. What's the background? The Babylonians had destroyed Jerusalem. The Babylonians had destroyed the temple, took all of the temple treasures, unbelievable amount of gold taken from that temple. Cyrus was being named way ahead of time, 150 years ahead of time. It's just saying that Cyrus is going to be authorizing the rebuilding of Jerusalem and the building of the temple. Long before Cyrus ever did it. Look at Isaiah 45 and verses 1 through 4. Isaiah 45, verses 1 through 4. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. Look at this, 150 years ahead of time, he names the man who's going to be the king, and he says he is his anointed. Who anointed Cyrus to be king? The Lord. The word Lord there is the word Jehovah. Whose right hand I have holden. Notice that. The right hand was a symbol of power. God says, I'm holding his right, in other words, I'm directing his right hand to do what he's going to be doing. Well, what's he going to be doing? To subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings to open before him the two leafed gates, and the gates shall not be shut. In other words, no one is going to be able to stand against him. I'm going to direct him, I'm going to direct his hand of power to subdue and to subject these kings to his authority, to his rule, and no one will be able to shut their gates against him. No one will be able to keep him out. They cannot keep him from doing this. And notice then what he says. I will go before thee. Who? Cyrus. I will go before thee, Cyrus, and make the crooked places straight. I'll make it easy for you. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. None of the gates, no matter how thick, no matter what they're made of, no matter how they're reinforced, can stop you. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, Jehovah, which call thee by thy name. Notice the emphasis there. He started out in verse 1 saying, Cyrus, you're my anointed. 150 years before Cyrus was ever born. Which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel, for Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel mine elect. Oh, Jacob's sake? Oh, that's another name that's used to signify Israel, isn't it? The nation, Israel. It signifies, I'm doing this for my servants, my people's sake, Israel, mine elect. And I have even called thee by thy name. Again repeating it. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. 3 times he mentions the name. Once he mentions a surname that Cyrus would be given. Thou hast not known me. He didn't know Jehovah. He didn't know God until he was introduced to him by Daniel. Daniel's the one that's going to introduce him to Cyrus, just as he did to Nebuchadnezzar and Nabopolassar. All of these kings that Daniel has been privileged by the providence of God to live through and to promote him to the rulers of the world. Now let's go just a little bit further. Cyrus again is anointed. God held his hand of power and directed him in the conquering that he's going to do. And God named Cyrus before he was ever born and emphasized his greatness. So now let's look at Jeremiah chapter 33, beginning with verse 10. Jeremiah chapter 33, beginning with verse 10. Cyrus's name, you're going to notice, is not mentioned, but it is obvious that this was a prophecy about Cyrus. Thus saith the Lord, again there shall be heard in this place, which ye say shall be desolate, without man and without beast. Where? Nineveh. Even in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. Even these places are going to be bare and barren and are desolate, without man, without habitation, and without beast. The voice of joy and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the voice of them that shall say, Praise Jehovah of hosts, for the Jehovah is good, for his mercy endureth forever. And of them that shall bring the sacrifice of praise unto the house of the Lord, for I shall cause to return the captivity of the land as at the first, saith the Lord. Did you notice that last 2 phrases? Return the captivity of the land? What's he talking about? In Jeremiah's time, again, way ahead of the time of Cyrus, they would have probably been wondering, just like we would if we didn't have Isaiah and Daniel to show us what would happen to the Israelites. They were going to be taken into captivity for 70 years in Babylon. The text continues, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, again in this place, which is desolate, without man and without beast, and in all the cities thereof shall be an habitation of shepherds, causing their flocks to lie down. In the cities of the mountains, in the cities of the vale, in the cities of the south, and in the land of Benjamin, and in the places about Jerusalem, and in the cities of Judah, shall the flocks pass again under the hand of him that telleth them, saith the Lord. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will perform that good thing which I have promised unto the house of Israel and to the house of Judah." I told you you're going into captivity. Why? Because they had given themselves to the idols of the land. They were worshiping them instead of Jehovah. All of them? No. That's where Daniel comes in. There was a remnant of people that continued to worship God. But the majority of them didn't. You might also, in your spare time, look at Jeremiah 25, verses 12 and 13. But consider something very important in verse 1. Cyrus made a command, and he put it in writing. Now, why is that so important? What's the importance of the fact that he made a command and then he put it in writing? Because later the Jews are going to have to prove that Cyrus had given them permission, a command to go back to the land, to rebuild Jerusalem, and to rebuild the temple. That's Ezra chapter 4. We'll get there later. Was Cyrus's edict allowing the temples and cities to be rebuilt only for the Jews? Nod your heads. Do you think yes or no? A lot of you are afraid to move your heads, aren't you? Don't worry, they won't fall off. But you think about it. You ask the question, was Cyrus's edict only for the Jews? And the answer is no. The Cyrus Cylinder recorded that Cyrus did this for all the nations that were under his control, all of them that were under his domain. It wasn't just for the Jews. As Bible students in the Lord's church, I'm afraid that many people have come to the conclusion that, oh, this was just for the Jews because that's what's emphasized in the Scriptures. But when we look at historical records, we learn that this was not just for the Jews. It was for all the nations that were under his domain. And remember, all the nations that were under his domain had formerly been under the domain of Babylon, plus added to. And before that, they had been conquered, a lot of them, by the Assyrians. So you have all of these nations that were conquered. Remember also that in that time, people who conquered other nations, they believed that their God was now more powerful than the God of the people whom they conquered. So that's why they won. That's why they conquered these people. But here is Cyrus doing something that was unheard of in that time. Go back and build your capital cities. Go back and build the cities of your land. Go back and rebuild your temples. When we consider verse 3 that we're going to be looking at, was Cyrus then a believer in the God of Israel? No. The text says, the Lord God, the Jehovah God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. Did you notice that? He looks at the God of Israel as nothing more than a member of a pantheon that he probably worships. He believes, just like Nebuchadnezzar did, and the other kings of Babylon, and the Assyrians, that there are many gods. and they have ranks, and there is one that is above all else. That's all that he's saying. This God in Jerusalem. He's the God in Jerusalem. He's not the God here. Verse 4 shows that Cyrus did not just authorize the return and the building of the temple, he helped finance it. Turn over with me to Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 7 and 8. There you'll notice that you have some more information than what you have right here. Nehemiah 2, verse 7 and 8. Moreover, I said unto the king, if it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come unto Judah. Now notice, when you look at the context, this is Nehemiah. He's going to be traveling back by the permission of Cyrus and the Persians to go back and rebuild. And he starts out by saying to the king, if it's according to your pleasure, give me a letter that I can give to the governors along the way, that they may convey me. What's he talking about? Help them, provide for them what they need, and safety. All of those things. And a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Then I came to the governors beyond the river, and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. Notice, the king helped provide safety. He helped protect them while they traveled. And he gave orders to the treasurer to do something for them. What? Provide them timber. To do what? To rebuild his house, the walls. That sounds kind of strange to me. Walls of the city? No. I believe it's talking about the walls of the temple. Just like they were done. Remember, Hiram sent timber to David so that Solomon could rebuild, or could, build the temple. And now those cities, Tyre and Sidon, are going to help provide timber again. The cedars of Lebanon. Unbelievable trees. Maybe something that, maybe we have something like it out in California, those giant, was it sequoia trees? Did I get that right? Redwoods. Sorry about that. These giant redwoods. They were huge, and they were good building material. So why did most of the Jews who were in captivity not go back to Jerusalem, or go to Jerusalem? We maybe should say, including both of those ideas, go back or go to Jerusalem. Well, some would have been too old. Take Daniel, for instance. Daniel, at this time, was probably somewhere around 90 years old or more. He was an old man. If you start, think about it this way. If we are correct in assuming that the time or the age that young men were being taken and then trained in Nebuchadnezzar's court by historical documents, usually around 14 years old, he arrived in that land around 14. He's in the school until he's 17. They went 3 years normally. And so 14, he's there through the entirety of the captivity of Israel. That's 70 years. That makes it 84. And he's into the reign of Cyrus. And Cyrus was not the first king of Persia. Isn't that interesting? He was an old man. He very easily could have been over 100 years old. Some were just too old to go to Jerusalem or to go back. Waycaster made this observation that I think was interesting. He said that some had become too comfortable in a foreign land. We're going to see some numbers in a little bit of how many went back. And by far, the majority stayed in the lands that they were in. Babylon, or formerly Babylon, Persia, and the other places they'd been scattered to. He also made another interesting observation that applies to us today in the church. He said, perhaps some do not long for heaven. Neither do they have the will to make the sacrifices necessary to attain that heavenly home because they have become comfortable in this world. When you and I look around us at members of the Lord's church, do we see some who probably are like that? It's sad, but we do. As long as they attend certain services, why, they consider themselves faithful. I know a man that doesn't show up except for maybe once every 3 months in worship service, and he thinks he's faithful because he studies his Bible at home. Too comfortable in this world, not willing to give up or make the sacrifices that are necessary in order to make it to heaven, to be granted that privilege by an almighty God. I think Waycaster made a point that's valid. Now, consider an instance when the tabernacle of God needed to be built. I couldn't help but think about this from this standpoint. We're going to see that free will offerings were made for the building of this temple, the one we're looking at in Ezra. Free will offerings. In Exodus 36, if you turn to Exodus 36, verse 6 and 7, we see something interesting. Exodus 36, 6 and 7. They're in the wilderness. They're heading toward the promised land. And a tabernacle is ordered by God to be built. And Moses gave commandment, and they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp of Israel, saying, let neither man nor woman make any more work for the offering of the sanctuary. Oh, what? So the people were restrained from bringing, for the stuff they had was sufficient for all the work to make it, and too much. Did you notice that? When's the last time that you ever heard an eldership that asked for money for a particular need, a work that needed to be done that they recognized, or maybe something in the building needed to be fixed and they didn't have the money? When's the last time you ever heard them get up and say, now folks, don't give any more. We've got way too much now. You gave too much already. Have you ever heard of anybody that ever happening? I haven't. And yet I know of congregations that had a need, and they asked the congregation to help, and they met that need very quickly. But they didn't give so much that the leaders had to stand up and say, hey, don't give any more. We've got too much. Free will offerings. God has always demanded free will offerings from His people. Now someone will sit back and say, "No, wait a minute, Bob, what about the Old Testament tithing, 10%? 10% was only a small part of what they gave. They had to give every 7th year, no work. Let the crops grow wild in the field. They had to give the 50th year, the year of Jubilee. Their giving, if you total it up, the Israelites' giving would have amounted to almost 47%. So 37% of that would have been free will offerings, wouldn't it? 10% was demanded. Look at Ezra 1, verses 5 through 11. And said, I beseech thee, O Lord God of heaven, the great and terrible God, that keepeth covenant and mercy for them that love him. Whoops, I'm in the wrong chapter. Sorry about that. Ezra, chapter 1, verses 5 through 11. Then rose up the chief of the fathers of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all them whose spirit God had raised, to go up to build the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. And all they that were about them strengthened their hands with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, and with beast, and with precious things, beside all that was willingly offered. Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods. Even those did Cyrus king of Persia bring forth by the hand of Merodach the treasurer, and numbered them unto Sheshbazzar the prince of Judah. And this is the number of them, 30 chargers of gold, 1,000 chargers of silver, 29 knives, 30 basins of gold, silver basins of a second sort, 410, and other vessels 1,000. All the vessels of gold and of silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up with them of the captivity that were brought up from Babylon unto Jerusalem. Who's going to return to the homeland? I'm going to use the word homeland because we're going to see some of these people had seen Jerusalem and the temple originally, but some of them had never seen it. They'd been born in these foreign lands. Well, it's all who God raised up. But what does that mean? It's talking about all those whose hearts were attuned to glorifying the God of heaven. All those whom God raised up. All those who were attuned to serving him, not counting those who may have been too sick to go back or go to Jerusalem, or those who were too old. Consider, not all then were stirred up to go home, quote, end quote. Some probably didn't go because they're just too old, or sickness, but the contingent of priests and Levites returned. Were those of Judah and Benjamin the only ones who went back? You know, again, there are those who sit back and say, you know, Israel, the northern 10 tribes, were taken into Assyrian captivity, and they were spread all over the world, and they are the lost tribes of Israel. Folks, there's no such thing as the lost tribes of Israel. How would you prove that? Representatives from any of the tribes that were scattered in all those nations that had been captured by Assyria, Babylon, and Persia were allowed to go back to their homelands. But again, how would you prove that people from some of the tribes other than Judah and Benjamin went back to Jerusalem? Well, what about Luke chapter 2 and verse 36 through 38? There you are introduced to a prophetess. You know her name, Anna. Anna was a prophetess, and the text says that she was of the tribe of Asher. Asher was one of the 10 tribes of the northern tribes of Israel. And she wasn't obviously the only one. There no doubt were many from the different tribes who had maintained their faith and maintained their allegiance to God and wanted to worship Him. And when enough people went back, they were there too. So that in the time of Jesus, when this prophetess talked about Jesus and she'd seen Messiah, there were others too. Those who talk about the lost tribes of Israel have an agenda. It's part of the premillennial agenda, that false religion that says the kingdom has not been set up yet, which we can easily prove has been set up. That God cannot be defeated. It's often amazed me when I think about it, that how anybody could believe, a preacher or someone who says he's a preacher, or a teacher, a Bible teacher who says that the kingdom hadn't come, and when you ask them, well, what kept it from coming when Jesus came? Well, the Jews defeated God's purpose. How could they say that? How could they pretend to worship a God that human beings can defeat? That's just absolute ludicrous. Who are all they that were about them strengthened their hands? Those who were going to go back. It's probably those who were remaining in the land, but it probably also included Cyrus, because remember, he told the treasurer, give them back the objects of the temple that were taken by Nebuchadnezzar. Provide for them the timbers that Nehemiah asked for. How did they strengthen their hands? By providing monetary assistance. And you know, there's a lesson for us there. You and I may not be able to go. I would love to go back and do more mission work in Indonesia. I would love to, but I probably wouldn't survive the airplane ride, according to my doctors anyway. But I can help in other ways, can't I? The same way you can help in mission. You may not be able to go to a particular place, but you have money. You have prayers, and we can use those, and God will listen to us, and we can use whatever means we have available to provide assistance, to strengthen our brethren's hands. When you look at verses 7 through 11, it shows the assistance that is provided primarily by Cyrus. He returns the temple items they needed for the worship. And notice the number of vessels is different in verses 9 and 10 from verse 11. 9 and 10 may be a list of the most important vessels, and possibly a scribal error could be involved in this in some way. There are some scribal errors. Nothing that is important to our salvation or really means much to our salvation in any way. The Septuagint gives the number of 2,489 vessels given in verse 11. Look at chapter 2. Now these are the children of the province that went up out of the captivity of those which had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away unto Babylon, and came again unto Jerusalem and Judah, every one unto his city. Now, I'm not going to read this whole list of names, and I'm not going to give you a test on it. Well, maybe I will. But we're going to go past this. But we're just going to make a couple of observations here. Why is this listing of genealogies important? It may seem unimportant to some. It may seem like just a list of names, but it shows the genealogy line from Abraham, and thus the lineage of Messiah. And the Bible is very careful to give us names that we can link back to those who would be in the lineage of Messiah. So this list is important from that standpoint. It also reinforces the lineage of the Levitical tribe. Why is that important? For the priesthood. Without the lineages, without being able to identify the lineages, no one can be a priest. That's the case today. All of the genealogical records of the priesthood were destroyed by the Romans when they destroyed Jerusalem and burned down the temple. All of those records were destroyed. No man today can prove that he was of the lineage of the Levites, and particularly the lineage of the priest. So today when you look at the Jews, they understand that. What do they have as teachers? They don't have priests. They have rabbis. A rabbi wasn't a priest. He was a great teacher under their system, but he wasn't a priest. It also forms the basis of inheritance. Remember when Joshua and the Israelites went into Israel, God had predetermined that each person had a particular land. Each tribe had a particular land promise, and each member of that tribe had a land promise. And Joshua was commanded by God to cast lots to determine what land belonged to who. The land inheritance would be determined by this genealogical record that's given to us here. It was important from that standpoint, as well as the Leviticals. Verses 1 and 2 give us a basic list of the leaders. And two important names are given that we find in Nehemiah and in Esther: Zerubbabel and Mordecai. And note how the chapter is divided then according to those who return, not just a random list of names. That's not what we see here. Verse 2, we see the leaders who went to Jerusalem. In verses 3 through 19, we see those who are listed by families. And then in verses 20 through 35, they are numbered according to localities. In verses 36 through 39, we have a number of the priests listed by families. And in verse 40 and 42, you see a number of the Levites, again, listed by families. Notice all these are listed by families. In verses 43 through 54, you see the families of the Nethinim. We'll get to that in a moment. And in verses 55 through 57, you see the families that are listed of Solomon's servants. Verse 59 through 63 lists the families of those who could not show, that is, prove their genealogy. Two classes of people are mentioned as those who could not prove their genealogy. There's the common people of verse 59 through 60, and those who claim to be of the priestly class, verses 61 through 63. In the book of Nehemiah, that will become extremely important, because there would be some who claim to be priest who could not be priest because they could not prove their genealogy. Those who claim to be priest would be serving as priest, but they better be able to prove who they are, that their lineage. And likewise, the common people, why was it important for them to be able to prove their lineage? You stop to think about it? Part of the same reason for those who claimed to be priests but couldn't prove it. If they couldn't prove they were priests, they couldn't prove they were a Jew. And these common people, and I'm using that in quotation marks, couldn't go beyond the court of the Gentiles in worship. You see, their worship would be affected. If they couldn't prove their lineage, that we are Jews, here's our lineage, their worship would be affected. They couldn't go past the court of the Gentiles. We'll come back next week and we'll begin in verse 64 of chapter 2 and notice some things there to the end of the chapter, hopefully.